Today's lesson is on whiteness and white privilege. To get our minds warmed up, I want you to think of the suffix ness. What does ness do when you put it on the end of the word? And what does it really mean? How does it change the definition of the word itself? Ness tends to indicate a state, condition, quality, or degree of something. I want you to just talk to the people around you quickly and brainstorm words that end in ness and define them. What is the commonality in their definitions, and what does ness do to all of these words to make them similar in their new meanings? Some examples are goodness, kindness, stillness, blindness, sadness, madness, realness. The list goes on. But back to whiteness. In order to understand racism, we need to direct our attention to whiteness. The suffix ness in whiteness is important. It highlights a particular state, condition, quality, or degree, in this case, of ever-presence or constants. So when we're talking about race, what does this mean? Whiteness is the social construction of particular characteristics and experiences, such as normalcy, neutrality, and humanity being associated with white people in the interest of maintaining white supremacy. At the same time, it is the glorification of Westernization and European imperialism. Every race and ethnicity has internalized this since colonization, even in other countries where the population is predominantly non-white. Whiteness goes unnoticed, for it is a foundation upon which we have come to internalize and understand the social order. Whiteness is realness. Whiteness is everything. It's in everything. And this social construct, this way that we have come to understand the world, has extremely negative material consequences on the quality of life of anyone who does not benefit from whiteness. So, anyone who's not white. The benefits of whiteness allow for white privilege to operate. Arguments against the existence of white privilege include that 1. Calling out whiteness is racism in itself. 2. We live in a post-racial society, meaning that because we've abolished slavery and segregation, everybody's now equal. 3. There are lots of white people who are poor or in bad circumstances. True, but they're not there because of their skin color. 4. Racism exists amongst many different groups of people, and it is therefore unfair to point to white people. This kind of relates to the first argument that pointing to white people is therefore racist. So for today, you've read Peggy McIntosh's White Privilege, Unpacking the Invisible Knapsack. Some important points that I wanted to pull out of the article before we delve into the knapsack items are: Peggy, who is a white woman, is writing from that perspective. She knows that she's writing from the perspective of white privilege, and she really critiques that by saying, I was taught to see racism only in individual acts of meanness, not in invisible systems conferring dominance on my group. She also says, as my racial group was being made more confident, comfortable, and oblivious, other groups were likely being made unconfident, uncomfortable, and alienated. Whiteness protected me from many kinds of hostility, distress, and violence, which I was being subtly trained to visit and turn upon people of color. Whites are taught to think of their lives as morally neutral, normative, and average, and also ideal, so that when we work to benefit others, this is seen as work that will allow them to be more like us. This one's really important. Lastly, she says, I have come to see white privilege as an invisible package of unearned assets which I can count on cashing in each day, but about which I was meant to remain oblivious. White privilege is like an invisible, weightless knapsack of special provisions, maps, passports, codebooks, visas, clothes, tools, and blank checks. Some of the knapsack items that stood out the most to me that I wanted to share with you guys are: when I am told about our national heritage or about civilization, I am shown that people of my color made it what it was. I can be sure that my children will be given curricular materials that can testify to the existence of their race. I can choose blemish cover or band-aids in flesh color and have them more or less match my skin. I can sear or dress in secondhand clothes or not answer letters without having people attribute these choices to the bad morals, the poverty, or the illiteracy of my race. I can turn on the television or open the front page of the paper and see people of my race widely represented. I will feel welcomed and normal in the usual walks of public life, institutional and social. If a traffic cop pulls me over or if the IRS audits my tax return, I can be sure I haven't been singled out because of my race. I can go into a music shop and count on finding the music of my race represented, into a supermarket and find the staple foods which fit with my cultural traditions, into a hairdresser's shop and find someone who can cut my hair. We're going to do a think, pair, share. I want you to pair up with one other person and reflect on either your own white privilege or the white privilege you've witnessed others benefiting from. I want you to share your findings with one another and indicate what you learned from your partner that you hadn't thought of yourself. You're then going to share your findings between one another as a class. And then I want you to think about what you learned from your classmates that, again, you hadn't thought of yourself. And realize just how hidden whiteness and white privilege are. Your main take-home activity is going to be reading Richard Dyer's White in preparation for next class. This reading is a little bit more abstract, and so I've highlighted some key points from it, some key quotes that I really liked, to get you guys kind of warmed up to the idea of what the article will be about. Dyer says, "There is no more powerful position than that of being just human. The claim to power is the claim to speak for the commonality of humanity. Raced people can't do that. They can only speak for their race. But non-raced people can, for they do not represent the interest of a race, but humanity as a whole. White people don't see white privilege, and the invisibility of these assets is part and parcel of the sense that whiteness is nothing in particular, that white culture and identity have, as it were, no content." Some after-class questions that I want you to ponder when you're at home, when you're in the grocery store, when you're walking home from school, when you're at soccer practice, whatever it is. I want you to think, did what you learned today make you uncomfortable? Did what you learned today affirm something you haven't been able to articulate before? How, if at all, will you move through the world differently after what you learned today? Regardless of your identity, what do you think of your quote-unquote individuality after learning about whiteness and white privilege? And lastly, I want you to go home and research what white supremacy, critical race theory, and Black liberation are, and prepare to discuss the connections between what you learned today and these terms in the next class, in addition to reading Richard Dyer's reading. So for the reflection component of this lesson, I first just want to say that I really, really, really enjoyed doing this and that I found it to be a very satisfying and empowering task. I made this lesson sort of in accordance with two assumptions. It is a grade 12 lesson, and I'm also kind of bringing my own teacher positionality into this. So I'm assuming that they've been properly briefed in grade 11 on foundational concepts in equity and social justice, and that this isn't going to be all new to them. And I'm also assuming that I, so far, have educated my students to the point of being able to critically engage with the content presented. My biggest challenge was breaking down in more simple terms concepts that I've researched and studied for years. This is my second master's degree. My first master's was in education, and it was very grounded in equity and social justice issues like this. So this stuff is really familiar to me, and knowing that I'm going to be going and teaching high school, this is one of my biggest challenges is wanting my students to be really critical and really smart and giving them so much advanced knowledge, but also knowing that you can't bring a horse to water, but you can't make it drink, right? So I want to make sure that they have enough prior knowledge and that they're ready to be learning this stuff so that I'm not losing them as I'm teaching it. So I'm constantly wondering, and this was a really great exercise, how do I engage my students critically in equity and social justice issues without losing them due to being too abstract or expectant of prior knowledge? So I was really happy with these specific expectations in the social sciences curriculum. I was really surprised to see a curriculum this advanced in equity and social justice issues. My high school education didn't remotely touch on any of these topics, nor did we have an equity and social justice course at all. I know we had challenge and change, and that didn't touch on any of this stuff. Um, I also, funnily enough, graduated in 2013 from high school. And so I'm wondering if this document um, is a huge difference from the documents that were there before. And if it's not, um, nevertheless, we have to remember that just because something is in the curriculum doesn't mean that it's actually being taught. But yeah, I'm really happy to see that this stuff is in the curriculum, and it makes me feel really confident going forward in the kinds of lesson plans that um, I have the freedom to make. I really enjoyed writing the learning goals as well in the lesson plan. It really made me think about my own practice as a teacher. Since this is a grade 12 course, I know my students will have been briefed on equity and social justice already in the grade 11 course. And I also know that I'll hold myself to a particular standard as a teacher. I want to have this lesson is an ideal version of me knowing that I've already educated my students well enough to be talking to them about whiteness and white privilege in a critical way while citing authors like McIntosh and Dyer. I think I incorporated the theory to practice component of this course into the mini lesson successfully because we discussed the readings and I got the students to reflect on the way whiteness and white privilege operates in their own lives and communities. And I hope that this kind of a conversation is something where they go home and they say to their parent, hey, I had never thought of this. Have you? As an additional research component, I also asked students to go home and to start to research the terms white supremacy, critical race theory, and Black liberation if they weren't already familiar with them as part of their take home activity. Because I don't want that to feel like a task. I want that to be something that they're actually excited to do when they go home because they've felt really enticed by the lesson. So I really appreciated writing out the learning goals as well as just what this whole assignment did and helping me really reflect on how I anticipate my practice as a teacher being. And I can't wait to hopefully use this lesson plan soon, maybe even in my first practicum. Thank you.